Hello, my friends. Welcome back to English Unleashed. I'm Tom. Today, you will take a very special type of listening test. It is simple, natural, and it will help you discover your true English level. Here is how it works. You will listen to 6 different stories. Each story belongs to a different level of English. We start from A1, which is the beginning level, and move step by step until C2, which is the expert level. Your job is simple. You listen and see how much you understand. After each story, you can rate yourself from 1 to 10. If you understand almost everything, that means you are ready for the next level. If you feel lost or confused, it means that the story is too high for you, and that is your level of proficiency. This is not an exam. This is a fun way to test yourself, and you have probably done another test in one of our previous episodes. So, relax and enjoy the stories. Let's begin with A1, which is beginner.
My name is Leo. I am 30 years old. I live in a small, quiet town near the sea. My life is simple. I like my life. Today, I want to tell you about my day. It is a normal day. It is not big or exciting, but it is real. It is my day. Every morning, I wake up at 6. My bedroom is small. It is warm. The sun comes in. The light touches my face. I open my eyes. I feel calm. I sit on my bed for a short time. I breathe slowly. Then I stand up. I stretch my arms. My back makes a small sound. I smile. My body wakes up too. I go to the kitchen. I make tea. I like tea. I do not like coffee very much. Tea feels light. Tea feels soft. I drink my tea slowly. I look out the window. I see the street. I see the small bakery. I see the blue sky. Sometimes I see an old man with his dog. The dog looks happy. I think the dog likes the morning too. At 7, I leave my home. I walk to my job. I work in a small bookstore. I love my job. I like the smell of books. I like the soft sound of pages. I like helping people find a book. Books make people smile. That makes me happy. At 5, I close the store. I walk home. The sky is orange and pink. The air is cool. I like this time of day. It is quiet. It feels soft. I go home. I change my clothes. And I cook dinner. After dinner, I sit at the window. I read or I listen to soft music. This is my simple day. It is not a big story, but it is my story, and I like it.
Okay. Now think, how much did you understand? Give yourself a number from 1 to 10. If you understood most of it, you can try the next level.
My name is Rosa, and today I want to tell you the story of my first job in a big city. It was a difficult but exciting time in my life. I grew up in a very small village where everyone knew each other. Life there was simple. People woke up early, worked on farms, and went to bed early. But I always dreamed of living in a bigger place. I wanted to see tall buildings, busy streets, and many new faces. When I turned 19, I decided to move to the capital city. My parents were worried, but they wanted me to follow my dreams. They hugged me, gave me a little money for the first month, and wished me good luck. I took a long bus ride to the city. When I arrived, everything felt new. The streets were loud with traffic. Cars moved fast. People walked quickly with serious faces. I felt small in this big place, but I also felt excited and ready for a new life. I found a tiny apartment to share with two other girls. It was not perfect. The walls were thin, and we could hear each other easily. The kitchen was old and small. The bathroom door did not close well. But it was my first home away from my parents, and I loved it because it felt like a new beginning. My first job was in a cafe on a busy street with many offices. The cafe was always full in the morning. People wanted hot coffee, warm bread, and fast service. On my first day, my hands were shaking because I was very nervous. I had to learn how to use the coffee machine, take orders, and talk clearly to customers. I made many mistakes. I gave a man the wrong drink. I forgot to give a woman her change. I even dropped a cup. I thought my manager would fire me. But my manager, a kind woman named Sophia, came to talk to me. She told me something I will never forget. She said mistakes are normal and the only real mistake is to stop trying. Her words made me feel calm again. Slowly, I became better at my job. I learned how to smile at customers even when they were tired or in a bad mood. I learned how to work fast but stay calm inside. I learned how to listen carefully and remember difficult orders. There was one man who always ordered a large coffee with 2 spoons of sugar and exactly 3 pieces of ice. Chuckles. I still remember it because it sounded funny to me. Every day after work, I walked around the city. I visited parks, bookstores, small markets, and quiet streets. I liked watching people. I liked the strong energy of the city. Something was always happening. A musician playing guitar, a couple arguing, children running after pigeons. The city felt alive in a way my village never did. But living in the city was not always easy. I missed my parents and my old home. I missed the quiet nights in the village. Sometimes I cried in my room because everything felt too big and too fast. But many times, I also felt proud. I was learning to live alone. I was learning how to grow and how to solve problems by myself. One afternoon, a customer told me something very nice. He said he liked the way I talked to people. He said my warm and friendly voice made others feel comfortable. I was surprised because no one had told me that before. His words made me feel stronger and more confident. After 6 months, something great happened. The cafe promoted me. I became the person who trained new workers. I showed them how to take orders, how to work with the machine, and how to stay calm. It felt strange because I remembered how scared I was on my first day. Now, I was helping others feel safe and confident. I felt proud every time a new worker said, "Thank you, Rosa. You helped me today." My life in the city taught me many things. I learned that fear is normal, but we should not let fear stop us. I learned that small successes are important, and I learned that people can be kind in surprising ways. So this is my story.
How much did you understand? Give yourself a number from 1 to 10. If you understood most of it, you can try the next level.
My name is Daniel, and I want to tell you about the year everything in my life changed. At that time, I was 25 years old and working in a small technology company. My job was safe, and my salary was enough for rent and food, but it did not make me happy. Every morning, I woke up feeling tired, not because I didn't sleep well, but because I didn't feel excited about the day ahead. My life felt like a long, straight road with no turns, no colors, and no surprises. I lived in a quiet apartment on the fifth floor of an old building. My neighbors rarely spoke to each other. The hallways were always silent. My own apartment was clean but empty, with only a small table, a sofa, and a bed. Sometimes, when I came home from work and turned on the lights, the room felt cold and lonely. I often asked myself, is this really my life? One cold evening in January, something happened that pushed me to rethink everything. I was sitting on a crowded train going home from work. People around me looked tired and bored, just like I felt inside. A little girl was sitting with her mother across from me. The girl was drawing on a small notebook with bright pencils. She drew a green tree, a yellow sun, and a big blue lake. When she finished, she showed the drawing to her mother and said, "Look, this is the place I want to visit someday." Her mother smiled softly and said, "That looks beautiful." I watched them in silence, and something inside me moved. It was like a small light turning on in a dark room. I thought about my own dreams. When I was younger, I always wanted to travel, learn new languages, and explore different cultures. I wanted to see mountains, oceans, and cities I only knew from books. But as I grew older, I stopped thinking about those dreams. I told myself I didn't have time. I told myself it was too late. I told myself I should be realistic. But watching that little girl talk about her dream with so much joy made me feel something I had forgotten. That night, I sat alone in my small apartment and looked around at the quiet room. I realized how long it had been since I felt excited about anything. So I took out a notebook and wrote a list of things I wished I had done. Travel to another country. Learn a new language. Try a new hobby. Make new friends. Go hiking. Explore the world. When I looked at the list, I felt a mix of fear and excitement. Fear because the list felt big. Excitement because it felt real. The next morning, something inside me changed. I walked into my office, sat at my desk, and suddenly decided to book a 2-week holiday. My coworkers were surprised. I had never taken such a long break before. I opened a travel website and stared at the screen for a long time. My hands were shaking a little because I knew this moment was important. Finally, I chose a country I always dreamed of, Japan. I clicked Book, and when I saw the confirmation email, my heart beat faster. I knew almost nothing about the Japanese language, but I didn't care. I wanted to feel lost in a new place. I wanted to wake up somewhere different. When I arrived in Japan 2 months later, my life began to change. I walked through busy streets full of bright lights and colorful signs. I visited quiet temples where time felt slow and peaceful. I ate food I had never tried before, like ramen, takoyaki, and matcha ice cream. I talked to strangers in simple English, and sometimes with my hands when English was not enough. I learned how big the world really was. I learned how many different lives people live. And I learned how small my fears were compared to the beauty of the world. One day, I got lost in a narrow street filled with small shops. Instead of feeling stressed, I felt strangely happy. I realized I didn't need to have control all the time. Sometimes it was okay to not know where I was going. That simple idea changed me. When I returned home after the trip, I felt different. Colors around me seemed brighter. My apartment didn't feel as cold as before. I didn't want to go back to my old life, where every day looked the same. So I made a decision. I started learning Japanese. I took 1 hour every day after work and studied. I bought books, I watched videos, I listened to podcasts, I wrote new words on sticky notes and put them on my walls. My friends laughed when they saw my apartment full of notes, but I didn't care. I loved seeing my progress. 3 months later, something amazing happened. A large international company saw my Japanese learning posts online and invited me to an interview. They needed someone with basic Japanese skills and experience in technology. I didn't feel ready, but I went anyway. During the interview, my hands were cold and my heart was beating fast, but I tried to speak clearly. I showed them how much I wanted to learn more. 1 week later, they hired me. I could not believe it. A simple moment on a train, a drawing from a child, a dream I thought I had lost. All of that pushed me into a new life. The rest of the year was full of surprises. I made new friends who helped me improve my Japanese. I joined a hiking group and climbed small mountains on weekends. I learned to cook new dishes and invited friends to try them. I started reading books again, something I had stopped doing for years. I felt more alive. I felt more open to the world. Looking back now, I know that I changed because I took one small step. And that small step opened a new road for me. Sometimes life is like that. It gives you a soft push and asks you if you are brave enough to follow it. That is the story of the year I changed my life.
How much did you understand? Give yourself a number from 1 to 10. If you understood most of it, you can try the next level.
My name is Jack, and this is the story of the mountain I could not climb. It is not a story about victory or achievement. Instead, it is a story about failure and the strange, unexpected way failure can lift us, guide us, and push us forward when we least expect it. People often talk about success as if it is the only teacher, but I learned more from this failure than from any achievement in my life. When I was 27, I decided I wanted to climb a famous mountain near my country's northern border. I had seen photos of it since I was a child. The mountain had a sharp peak that cut the sky like a blade. Snow covered its slopes like a thick white blanket, and on clear days, the sky above the summit looked so close that it seemed to rest right on top of the mountain. To me, it felt like a place from a dream, a place where the world became silent and pure. I trained for months. Every morning, before the sun fully rose, I ran up hills near my home. I forced myself to carry a heavy backpack to make my legs stronger. On weekends, I hiked long trails alone, listening to the sound of my breath and the steady beat of my heart. I bought gear I could hardly afford, special boots that promised to keep my feet warm, thick gloves that made my hands feel like they belonged to someone else, a warm jacket so heavy it almost felt like armor. I read every book I could find about climbing. I watched hours of videos. I spoke to experienced climbers who had stories full of danger and beauty. Each person told me the same thing. The mountain is beautiful, but it is not gentle. You must respect it. You must never think you are stronger than the mountain. When the climbing season finally came, I joined a small group of climbers. There were 6 of us, including a guide named Mira. She was strong, quiet, and confident. She walked with a steady rhythm, like she had learned the mountain's heartbeat. She didn't talk much, but when she did, her voice carried calmness. She was the kind of person you trusted immediately without needing to know why. We began our climb early in the morning. The sky was clear, and the air was cold enough to bite our faces, but the cold made me feel alive. I felt excitement and fear living together inside my chest, like 2 animals fighting for space. For the first hours, everything felt perfect. We walked through forests that smelled like pine and wet earth. We crossed small rivers where the water ran fast and sharp. We laughed. We took pictures. We felt like a team, like people connected by the same goal. But as we climbed higher, the weather began to change. A cold wind blew across the mountain, cutting through our clothes. Clouds slowly covered the sun. The path became steeper, and the rocks grew slippery because of the thin layer of snow forming on them. I tried to stay calm, but a quiet fear started growing inside me. It sat in my stomach like a small stone. After 8 long hours of climbing, we reached a small base camp. My legs were shaking, and my hands felt weak. We rested, ate warm soup that tasted better than anything I had eaten in weeks, and prepared for the final part of the climb. Mira looked at the sky for a long time before she spoke. She said the weather was not stable. Storms could come quickly at that height. She told us to stay focused, to listen carefully, and to follow her directions without question. The next morning we started again. The air was colder than before, and the snow under our feet made soft crunching sounds. The path was narrow and dangerous. At one point, we had to cross a thin ledge with a deep fall on one side. My legs shook as I stepped forward. I could feel the wind pushing against my body like it was trying to test my balance. I focused on my breathing. In, out, slow, steady. Mira told me to keep my eyes on the rock in front of me, not on the empty space below. Her voice kept me moving. As we climbed higher, the air became thin. I struggled to breathe. My chest felt heavy, like someone was sitting on it. Every step felt twice as hard as the one before. But I pushed forward. I wanted to continue. I wanted to reach the top. I wanted to see the world from the summit I had dreamed about since childhood. But dreams do not control the mountain. When we were just 400 meters away from the summit, everything changed. A strong storm arrived suddenly, as if the mountain had decided that we had come far enough. Snow fell like white fire, fast and sharp. The wind screamed so loudly it felt like the mountain was warning us to leave. The air turned freezing. Mira shouted that we had to turn back. My heart dropped. I looked up at the summit. It was so close that I felt I could reach it with my hand. So close that it almost hurt to look at it. But the mountain did not care about my dream. It cared only about its own weather. We turned back, and the walk down felt endless. It was painful. Not physically, emotionally. Every step felt like a step away from something important. When we finally reached the base camp, the excitement inside me had turned into a heavy emptiness. In the following days, I could think of only one thing. I failed. I trained for months. I worked harder than ever. And still, I failed. I felt angry. I felt disappointed. And I felt ashamed, even though no one blamed me. But slowly, something began to change inside me. Friends reminded me that I had tried something difficult. Mira told me that failure on a mountain is natural and necessary. She said mountains teach you to be humble. They teach you to respect nature. They teach you that you cannot control everything in life. 1 week later, I began training again. Not to prove anything, not to show off, but because I realized something important. Failure does not end your story. Sometimes it begins a new one, a stronger one, a wiser one. I still have not reached the summit of that mountain, but the failure taught me more than success ever could. It taught me patience. It taught me discipline. It taught me respect for nature, for difficulty, and for myself. And one day, when I am ready, I will go back.
How much did you understand? Give yourself a number from 1 to 10. If you understood most of it, you can try the next level.
My name is Helena, and my story begins in my third year of university, during a period in my life when I was convinced I understood the world far better than I actually did. I studied psychology, and like many young students who had memorized just enough theories to feel clever, I believed that knowledge and wisdom were the same thing. I walked across campus with a quiet confidence, but it was a confidence built on shallow foundations, the kind that collapses the moment something real challenges it. Everything changed when I joined a course taught by a professor named Dr. Morgan. He was a thin, older man with silver hair that he often pushed back absent-mindedly and quiet eyes that seemed to observe more than most people ever said aloud. He never raised his voice. He didn't need to. Whenever he spoke, the entire classroom fell into a kind of attentive silence, as though all of us instinctively understood that what he was about to say carried weight. On the first day of class, he walked in, placed his notes on the desk with deliberate calm, and asked a single question that instantly unsettled me. What do you think the purpose of education is? Students raised their hands and gave the predictable answers. To get a job, to learn important information, to become independent. Dr. Morgan listened politely, nodding from time to time, and then he gently shook his head. What he said next has stayed with me ever since. The purpose of education, he said, is not to fill your mind with information. The purpose is to train your mind to see. At first, I didn't understand what he meant, but he went on. Knowledge, he explained, is easy to collect. You can fill your shelves with books and your notebooks with definitions, but wisdom, the ability to discern patterns, understand human behavior, and connect ideas with clarity, is far more subtle. Real education begins, he said, when you stop trying to memorize everything and start observing what is actually in front of you. During that semester, his classes felt less like lectures and more like long conversations with someone who had spent a lifetime studying people, not from textbooks alone, but from experience. He brought in stories from his own life, from former students, from strangers he had met on trains or in cafes. He described moments of failure, moments of quiet success, moments of heartbreak, and moments of unexpected kindness. None of the stories were dramatic in a movie-like way, yet each one carried a deeper lesson that revealed itself only if you listened carefully. One story that stayed with me was about a student who had failed his final exam. The student came to Dr. Morgan feeling desperate and ashamed, asking for another chance. Instead of giving him a new test, the professor told him to return in 1 week with an observation. Confused, the student asked what he should observe, and Dr. Morgan simply replied, "Anything. Just watch the world carefully and bring back something that changes the way you think." The student spent the week walking around the city, unsure of what he was supposed to be looking for. He noticed cars, trees, cafes, people rushing around, the usual things one sees but rarely pays attention to. But one evening, he saw an old man feeding pigeons in a park. Children ran around him laughing, and the birds moved in small circles at his feet. The scene was ordinary, almost forgettable, but the student noticed something unexpected. The old man looked completely at peace, as though that small, simple act was enough to fill his life with meaning. When the student returned to class, he told Dr. Morgan about the man. He admitted that he didn't understand why someone could look so calm during such a simple activity. Dr. Morgan smiled and said, "You've learned your lesson." Happiness rarely comes from grand achievements. It often hides in the quiet, fleeting moments most people ignore. That story changed something in me. For years, I had believed that my future happiness depended on big plans and impressive accomplishments. I chased good grades, a good reputation, and a clear path toward a successful career. But I realized, with an uncomfortable jolt, that I had spent almost no time noticing the small, meaningful details of my life. I was always rushing ahead, never slowing down to pay attention to the present. Dr. Morgan challenged us to keep a daily journal, not about our tasks or goals, but about the things we noticed. A stranger holding the door open, the way sunlight reflected off a window, the warmth of tea on a cold morning, a brief moment of gratitude. At first, the exercise felt strange and even pointless, but slowly, it began to train my mind to tune into the world with a new kind of awareness. It was as if I were learning to see in a deeper, more attentive way. Dr. Morgan challenged us to keep a daily journal, not about our tasks or goals, but about the things we noticed. A stranger holding the door open, the way sunlight reflected off a window, the warmth of tea on a cold morning, a brief moment of gratitude. At first, the exercise felt strange and even pointless, but slowly it began to train my mind to tune into the world with a new kind of awareness. It was as if I were learning to see in a deeper, more attentive way. By the end of the semester, I felt like a different person. I started listening to people with more patience instead of planning my response while they were still speaking. I read books more slowly, letting the ideas sink into my mind instead of rushing to finish the chapters. I became more aware of other people's emotions, especially the quiet sadness some of my friends carried behind their jokes. I realized how much of the world I had been missing simply because I was always distracted. Dr. Morgan taught me something that no textbook had ever explained. Intelligence is the ability to solve problems, but wisdom is the ability to understand people. You can be intelligent without being wise, but you cannot be wise without paying attention. Years later, when I became a psychologist myself, I often looked back on that class as the moment my real education began. I could still hear Dr. Morgan's voice in my mind whenever I sat with a patient. Notice what they are not saying. Notice the silence between their words. Notice the emotion behind their eyes. These small details, the ones most people overlook, often reveal the truth. That professor changed my mind, and without meaning to, changed the direction of my entire life. And all he did was teach me how to see.
How much did you understand? Give yourself a number from 1 to 10. If you understood most of it, you can try the next level.
My name is Nicholas Hartley, and this is a story about silence. Silence not as the simple absence of sound, but as a presence, a force, a kind of intangible companion that reshapes you from the inside out. It happened 10 years ago, during a period when the world around me felt unbearably loud, not only with actual noise, but with a kind of mental clutter that seemed to drown out everything that mattered. At the time, I lived in a fast-paced city and worked as a journalist for an international newspaper. My life was an endless cycle of deadlines, late-night assignments, and constant pressure to stay ahead of the story. People expected quick answers, instant reactions, and perfect clarity at all hours. I woke up to a barrage of emails, spent my days chasing narratives that rarely held meaning for longer than 24 hours, and fell asleep with the sound of sirens, traffic, and my own thoughts echoing in the back of my mind. I felt as though my life had collapsed into noise, external noise, and the internal noise I had never bothered to acknowledge. One winter morning, after several weeks of working without rest, something inside me simply gave way. It wasn't dramatic, it was subtle, like the quiet snap of ice breaking on a frozen lake. My thoughts slowed. My body felt heavy, as though I had been carrying an invisible weight for years. Even the simplest tasks, answering a message, boiling water, tying my shoes, felt overwhelming. Looking back now, I realize it was exhaustion mixed with a kind of emotional disintegration that I hadn't wanted to admit. If I had recognized the signs earlier, I would have stepped back long before I reached that point. But when you are caught up in the chaos, you don't always see the damage being done. That morning, I walked into my editor's office, fully expecting him to dismiss me for being weak. Instead, he raised an eyebrow and quietly granted me a week off. Even now, I sometimes think that if he had refused, I might have pushed through until something inside me broke completely. I might have kept drowning in work until I no longer recognized myself. Without thinking too much, I packed a bag and boarded a train to a remote mountain village I had never visited. I chose it simply because it was far away from everything familiar, far enough to break away from the world I had allowed to swallow me. When I arrived, the first thing I noticed was the air. It was sharp, clean, almost primordial, as if it belonged to another century. There were no cars, no frantic voices, no neon signs screaming for attention. Only tall trees swaying gently, the low murmur of wind moving through branches, and the distant, steady sound of water flowing over rocks. I rented a small wooden cabin at the edge of a dense forest. The owner, an elderly woman with soft eyes and a voice that sounded like she hadn't rushed a sentence in decades, handed me the key and said, "Rest as long as you need." It was such a simple sentence, yet it felt like permission to breathe for the first time in years. That evening, I built a fire and sat in front of the window. Outside, the world was covered in snow that reflected the faint blue light of the winter sky. For the first time in as long as I could remember, I heard nothing. No messages buzzing, no alarms shouting, no human voices filling the air. Just silence, thick and steady, settling around me like a soft blanket. At first, the quiet felt uncomfortable, almost frightening. I realized how dependent I had become on noise to distract me from myself. But slowly, something inside began to shift. The silence became softer, then warmer, then somehow familiar. It carved out a space in my mind that I had forgotten existed. On the second day, I wandered into the forest. Snow fell gently from the branches, landing on my coat like tiny bursts of cold light. My footsteps created a soft, crunching rhythm on the ground. I felt as though I were walking inside a painting, still, calm, untouched by the frantic world I had left behind. After an hour, I reached a frozen lake. Its surface was white and smooth, like glass covered with a thin layer of clouds. I stood there for a long time, letting the cold air fill my lungs. And then, without warning, tears slid down my face. Not from sadness, from release. It was as though the silence had reached into a part of me I had shut down years earlier and opened a door I hadn't realized I'd locked. If someone had told me years before that silence could be cathartic, I would have laughed. But if I had understood that earlier, I might have saved myself from years of burnout. For the rest of the week, I drifted into a routine that felt both ancient and restorative. I woke with the sun. I wandered through the woods. I cooked simple meals. I read books I had carried for years but had been too preoccupied to open. My thoughts became clearer, less disordered. For the rest of the week, I drifted into a routine that felt both ancient and restorative. I woke with the sun. I wandered through the woods. I cooked simple meals. I read books I had carried for years but had been too preoccupied to open. My thoughts became clearer, less disordered. My breathing slowed. My body gradually reclaimed its strength, as though silence itself had been stitching me back together. On the fifth day, something unexpected happened. I met an old man by the lake. He was fishing, although the water was nearly frozen solid. He greeted me with a gentle smile and said, "Sometimes it isn't the fish we come here for. Sometimes it's the silence." We talked for nearly 2 hours, though it felt like half that time. He told me stories about his life, his joys, his regrets, the people he had lost. What struck me most wasn't what he said, but the way he said it. His voice had a steadiness that made me feel as if everything he said mattered, even the small details. Before I left, he looked at me and said, "The world is loud because people are afraid of silence. Silence forces us to face ourselves, but once you learn to listen to it, silence becomes a friend." If I hadn't met him, I might never have understood what silence could teach me. When the week ended, I packed my bag and walked to the train station. The air felt lighter, and so did I. It was as though the silence had polished my thoughts the way a river smooths a stone. The world had become quiet, not because the noise had disappeared, but because I had finally learned how to listen beneath it. When I returned to the city, the noise was still there, but it no longer controlled me. I could hold on to the quiet I had found, like a small flame that refused to go out. I continued my work as a journalist, but everything felt different. I listened more carefully. I noticed the nuances in people's stories. I heard the emotions hiding between their words. Silence taught me something no book or mentor ever had. It taught me to understand myself, and the world, with a deeper clarity. And every time life becomes too loud again, I return, in my mind, to that lake, to that man, to that week when the world finally became quiet.